that big runoff election just yesterday. 2 Senate races, unprecedented turnout. More than 4.5 million people in a January election turning out, more than 70% voting via mail, more than 1 million coming out to the polls. The Republican Party feeling confident going in that they would likely win those races, and it turns out that the 2 Democratic candidates actually outperformed Joe Biden among key Democratic constituencies, among African Americans, among young people in the suburbs, doing better than expected, and therefore CBS News projects that both Democrats have won those 2 seats. Really an extraordinary development, given to not only just about what's changed in the state of Georgia, once a ruby red state, and the changing demographics in a state like this, but Raphael Warnock is the reverend and the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin Luther King spoke from that podium. I was there for just this year for the funeral of John Lewis. This is a landmark election because Senator-elect Warnock, I guess we could call him Reverend Warnock, becomes the first African-American elected Democrat from the South, the first from Georgia. Extraordinary. As he pointed out today, his mother, who used to pick cotton in Georgia, was able to pick her son and vote for her son to be a United States Senator.
And this is part of the legacy as well of the last 2 years of political fighting in this country, that we have seen tremendous change and progress in corners of the country where many didn't think it was possible. And this is also the result of about a decade's worth of work by Democrats in Georgia to gin up support, find people,
contact them, speak to them,
and get them to vote.
Try to persuade them. It's hard work. It takes many, many years. Both parties learn this. But there's some interesting news to share with you, Nora and Ed. The Vice President's office has just released a statement saying 2 things that are important. One, that the Vice President never left the Capitol, and that he has worked throughout the day with all branches of government and senior congressional leadership to make this situation better. That's my description of what the statement says, and that he is prepared to resume his duties tonight when Congress reconvenes.
That's extraordinary. There's a lot of news coming out of the Capitol. I want to talk about that in just a minute. But first, also want to go to Georgia as we're on that note, because Mark Strassmann has covered those 2 Senate races there, and he is outside Ebenezer Church tonight. Mark?
Nora, with your indulgence, I want to talk first about a further ripple of what we've been watching in Washington. Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and the staff for the last several weeks have needed security because they've lived with threats. Well, this morning outside the state capitol building in downtown Atlanta, a group of Trump protesters gathered. On the other side of the building stood 4 men in military-style clothing carrying long guns. And out of an abundance of caution, Raffensperger decided to evacuate his staff. He sent them all home because he knew that, after all, they still had an election to oversee. And even though there are thousands of ballots here still uncounted, apparently there is no way that the Republican candidates can make up the gap. So we have 2 senators-elect here in Georgia. First, of course, is John Ossoff. John Ossoff is 33 years old. He's the first Jewish senator elected from the state of Georgia. And then you have our Pastor Raphael Warnock, the first black senator elected from the state of Georgia. It has been a remarkable and historic day, a remarkable and historic election, 24 hours here in Georgia. It's a day that many Democrats and many Republicans never thought that they would live to see, and yet it's here. And I have to tell you that the ripples here, what it suggests about Georgia as a changing state, the referendum on the Trump years, because the president came here and campaigned nominally for these candidates, mostly for himself and his fraud allegations. And in the end, Metro Atlanta's changing demographics, younger, more diverse, more progressive, turned their back on the president and instead voted for the 2 Democrats. And again, it's something that many state Republicans here are furious about, because they believe that the president's approach was a distraction, helped depress turnout among Republicans, because in the end, not enough Republican voters showed up, and more than enough Democratic voters showed up. Nora?
And I know Mark is someone that has lived there in Atlanta and Georgia and reports all the time and talks to many people. It seems remarkable what has changed there.
You know, it really has. It's, you know, Georgia, as you've said, once ruby red, that has been slowly changing. But you do have the sense, both with the president's defeat here and now with the two senators, that these changes may be happening much faster than people realized, and that the Republican Party's traditional approach wasn't working particularly well as time was going on. And then, of course, the Trump years was something profoundly different. The whole overall approach is very, very different. And I think what you can say here is that the president wore out his welcome in the suburbs of Atlanta. Many Republicans, who I know, lifelong Republicans, have said, yeah, I just can't do it. And so there is going to be a moment of reckoning, I think, here in Georgia and elsewhere. Georgia could be a cautionary tale for other red states that have gone all in on the Trump approach and essentially been very, very loyal to the president. So we're going to have to see how that goes, of course, in the days and weeks ahead. But clearly, there is a real seismic shift going on here in Georgia.
It's a brilliant political analysis and reporting. Thank you, Mark Strassmann, because even one of the closest aides to the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, made that point. When the results finally came in, he made the point, he said, suburbs, suburbs, suburbs. That when you've turned off those suburban voters that could be traditionally more conservative, that want to perhaps vote Republican, but we saw this in the presidential election, but we're turned off by some of the president's rhetoric and other stuff, switch back to the Democratic Party, that is the flashing warning sign for the Republican Party that I think led Mitch McConnell today to deliver that extraordinary rebuke of the president, as well as the efforts by his Republican colleagues to prolong this process. Because you both have covered the Congress, as have I. McConnell will usually let the process kind of play itself out, knowing that it will reach an ultimate outcome. Today he made clear he wasn't in favor of this process, that
No.
some of the Republican senators were under.
No, not only was he not in favor of it, he had actively, privately discouraged it, was unable to achieve that, and was essentially, with his speech, taking those who did not heed his request to the rhetorical woodshed. There's something important about Georgia, because we talked earlier about, were there warning signs? Yes, there were. Gabriel Sterling, one of the top election officials in Georgia, who has had to repeatedly debunk and explain away all of these wacky, unjustified theories of things going askew with vote counts in Georgia, many weeks ago said, Mr. President, stop this rhetoric. People will get hurt. People will get shot. He said those words out loud with great passion and great emphasis. Weeks ago, not yesterday, he foreshadowed, sadly, regrettably, heartbreakingly, what we saw play out today.